Namaste.
Namaste.
Love. Love is a lot easier said than done. And in English, we're especially hampered because we only have one word for it. But I'm not entirely convinced that knowing the fact that in other cultures there's more than one word for love helps us very much if we're native English speakers, because we still grew up with our concept of love being wrapped around one word. And I think that's an almost impossible mind frame to break. And the fact that we, in our language, conflate romantic love with the love we feel for a friend, the love we might feel for a child, nephew, niece, other young relative, and the love we might feel for society at large is really difficult. And so if we're really, really honest with ourselves, we get into a really hard place. And it's kind of unfortunate that John, anyway, has Jesus saying, love one another, and then not really being very helpful about how to go about that. Like, here's what you do. And the fact that he says, if you follow my commandments, you'll love one another, isn't very helpful, because he said the only two commandments were to love God and love one another. So it's not unlike going to the doctor and saying it hurts when I do this, and the doctor saying don't do that. And I think, in a sense, Eastern religions come at love a little bit better, but not much. This story, this first reading from Ram Dass, lacks for space and brevity the first part of the story, which was that Ram Dass had decided he was going to be really holy and not handle money. So he talked somebody into being his bag man and holding the money for him. And one day when they left the temple, the instructions were return tomorrow at 4. Except everybody got it in their head that they would just go back at noon. And by the time Ram Dass discovered everybody had gone, he couldn't take the bus because he didn't have any money, because the guy that held his money had gone to the temple on the bus at noon. And apparently it wasn't really a bad bus ride, but it was quite a bad walk, because the walk was on a dirt path through different villages, up through mountains, and so he had plenty of time to fume and build his anger by the time he showed up, and then this reading starts. It's been said that love might be understood as wanting what is best for the spirit of the person you're loving. So you want, in simpler terms, you want them to come into the fullness of who they might be. And I think that's helpful. But it can leave us believing that we have to manipulate them into that place. And that never works. You can poke and prod somebody into doing something, but they seldom come out of that saying, gee, I really enjoyed that, I'd like to do it again. And so maybe it's much more subtle than all that. And maybe it begins with us. We are conditioned through evolution to care first and foremost about ourselves. And we should be happy that our ancestors did that, or we wouldn't be sitting here in this room. There was something to be said for survival, that you went out and made sure that your tribe had the food it needed, had access to water, had a relatively safe place to stay. But very few of us have to forage for our food or chase it down the street with a spear anymore. We don't have to walk to the stream to get our water. And there probably, unless you live in Texas, aren't marauders about to cross the border to invade us. And so our job becomes shedding some of those very innate ingrained instinctive habits. And one of them is caring more about myself than I do anybody else. But there's an irony in that the only way that I can really care about somebody else, I believe, is if I'm okay with myself and who I am. If I despise who I am, I'm not going to be able to look at somebody else with very much compassion, because I'm depleting my compassion banks. And if you pay attention to what people say around you throughout the day, it's pretty frightening. And you may even notice it in your own self-talk. I know I do. When I make a mistake, I don't say, "Oh, I didn't do that very well." I say, "Well, that was stupid." And it gets us in that place where we see ourselves as more and more defective, and if we want to be whole, that must come from outside us, from somebody else. So then if I'm going to love you, it really becomes a question of what are you going to do for me? That's the popular understanding of love. How do I feel when I'm around you? And if I feel warm and fuzzy, then I love you. You may not be able to stand me. You may feel horrible when you're around me, and you probably will after a while, if I keep trying to take what I need from you, instead of finding it inside myself. The Dalai Lama has said regarding compassion that we should all be compassionate. We should all place others ahead of ourselves. And if we can't do that, if we are too selfish to do that, then we should still place them in front of us, because if we treat them with compassion, we'll probably get what we want. And most of us in the West use that sort of backhanded method. And I think it's really interesting that Ram Dass was told to love everybody and tell the truth. And I believe there's a connection there that's really important, because if I love you, I'm going to tell you the truth. If you've had, or you know people who have had a child that just isn't growing up, you know, maybe I ran into a guy like that this week. He's probably close to 35 years old. I'm pretty sure he still lives in his parents' basement and plays video games all day. And there's nothing wrong with playing video games. I think within a couple of generations, our thumbs will actually be twice as long as they are now because of that. And at some point, the parent has to say, get a job, get out. Now, if your definition of love is that every interaction you have is going to leave the other person smiling, you're not going to believe that that's very loving. But on the other hand, if your definition of love is more like doing what's best for that person, encouraging them to reach their potential, then saying, get a job and get out, can be the most loving thing we can do, assuming that they aren't, 12 years old. And we can, most of us can reach a point in those situations where we're willing to tell the truth. But there's a part of us that so wants the approval of others that I think there will always be times when we tell people what they want to hear instead of telling them what they probably need to hear. And that's, I believe, what Neem Karoli Baba was saying to Ram Dass when he said, love everybody and tell them the truth. It has to be both. Even when it's difficult, maybe most importantly when it's difficult. Now, of course, there's exceptions to every rule. You wouldn't walk up to a stranger on the street and say, gee, that outfit makes you look horrible. And most of us know if a spouse or partner asks us if the clothes they're wearing make them look fat, the proper answer is, why no? Whether they do or not. It doesn't mean that we have to be brutal about the truth. We might say when asked, gee, does this outfit make me look fat? No, of course not. But I don't know that I like those colors on you very much. We might find a way to tell the truth that still has some compassion to it, that isn't wounding somebody, but still says the essence of the truth, which is I don't think you look the way you're going to want to look while you're wearing that. There's people who ask us our opinion on things all the time. And some of the time, the most loving thing is not to give it. To say, this is a decision I think you need to make. Which really means, and you may have to say it this brutally, I'm not going to get put in the middle on this one. I know of a family, notice how I'm protecting the identity of myself here, where, but this happens a lot, days like Mother's Day, where there's more than one child. And the children will do this thing where this one's going to invite mom over here, and this one's going to invite mom over here, and neither of them are going to invite the other. And now it becomes this is it a subtle contest of who loves me? Which one of us do you love more? I don't know, it might be. But the most loving thing is maybe to say, I won't be put in the middle. And so, I will be at my house, and whoever wants to come can come. It's a complete change from a lot of how we view love. It's a complete change from this idea that we need to be kind at all costs, and defining kindness as making sure that nobody's upset. That's the impossible dream. And sometimes, in fact, making sure that nobody's upset is really making sure that nobody grows. And it may also be that making sure that nobody grows because we value our comfort more than truth. The good news or the bad news, depending on your perspective, is it isn't a matter of just throwing a switch. It really is a matter of practice. It really is a matter of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And sometimes 1 step forward and 2 steps back. It's a matter of trying and sometimes hitting the mark and sometimes missing the mark. And there's nobody that's perfect at it. I certainly don't mean to imply I'm perfect at it, as you could see if you would look at my text messages from just before we started today, trying to negotiate the last-minute changes in plans that are really these really complex games. One of the great things about truth is it takes us out of the need to play games. It can take us into the place to just say the way it is. And then the hard part comes, and then we have to live with that. But remember I think it was in the 80s, Codependence Anonymous became huge. Melody Beattie wrote that book, Codependent No More. And instantly we discovered that everybody is codependent. And so that makes me question whether it's entirely, altogether a bad thing if we all do it. But it's still a tendency in ourselves I think we need to recognize. There's no parent that would look at a young child and say, well, actually there are some, but there are very few who would look at a young child and say, I can either make you happy or make you healthy. I'd rather make you happy. Here's 6 pounds of M&Ms, go to town. Somehow when we get to be adults, we need to find an example that's the adult equivalent of that. And in the end, if we succeed, we all get to a place where we enjoy each other's company so much more. Maybe somebody will exclude themselves from the party. Maybe somebody will say, this being called into wholeness is more than I can handle right now. And we have to be okay with that too. But wholeness and happiness and fulfillment are really all tied to growth processes. And as long as we remember to be patient and gentle with ourselves and with others, we can achieve that with a minimum of discomfort. And I think that's what Jesus meant when he said, love one another. That's what Neem Karoli Baba meant when he said, love everybody and tell the truth. And maybe they both sensed that we have to figure out exactly how to go about that in our own lives for ourselves, because for each of us it will be a little different. Maybe that's why the instruction manual isn't there. And that's okay too.